Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. We have a great treat for you. It won't be me tonight talking. It will be, yay, Matt Goldman over here in the middle, who I thought I had arranged an escape from St. Paul, Minnesota in the dead of winter to beautiful Scottsdale, but he tells me it's been so beautiful in St. Paul, hardly was worth it. But anyway, I'm a big fan of Matt's books, 3 Neil Shapiro books, of which the most recent is called The Shallows. And I'm thrilled that he's here, and he will be back on June, what is it, 3rd?
3rd.
To talk about his 4th book, so we're really pleased about that. So on Matt's left is Jason Pinter, who is an author and a publisher, so he comes to us from on several different footings, right?
That's right.
And he has a wonderful book tonight called Hideaway, which is starting a series, which I think is absolutely terrific. So I'm delighted that he's here to talk to us. And then we have Phillip Margolin, the veteran author, right?
Yes.
Who's reinvented himself, and this is book 3 in his exciting series with a female lawyer, but still in Oregon, where we're all used to finding Phil, right? So anyway, I'm going to retire over here and let Matt take it away, and thank you very much for coming.
Thanks. This is my first time as moderator, so yeah, I'm usually one of these guys. But it was nice. Barbara invited me down because my books come out in the summer, and every time I come here, it's 105. And it's not an exaggeration. It's been 105 each of the 3 times I've been here. So this is nice. I'm just gonna. Your book comes out tomorrow.
Tomorrow. So if you get it, you'd be the first kid on your block to have the book, because it doesn't officially get published until tomorrow.
But they're here.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Great.
What do you mean are they here? What kind of books are
I know. You can get it.
You have to sleep in the store and then just we'll get them from the truck tomorrow.
And Jason's book came out March 1st.
Yeah. My book just came out last week, so.
So these are new books we're going to talk about. Before I ask you guys to explain, I'm just going to say the one thing they have in common, your books, is that they both feature very strong women characters. So strong that Robin was a UFC fighter, and Rachel couldn't. So I just want to ask each of you, like, what or who motivated you to write these strong, kick-ass protagonists?
Well, actually, there's a funny story behind this, because I've had 2 writing careers, one in the 1970s and early 80s, and this was when I had a full-time law practice, and the 2 main characters were males, and after my first book came out, my editor at Pocketbook said, would you be willing to write a series with a female prosecutor? And I panicked, and I said, I can't write a book with a woman main character. I couldn't do that, so I turned him down. So then the 3rd book was in 1993, and I was gonna. It's about a serial killer, and he dehumanizes women before he kills them. And I was planning on having a male main character, and there's a scene where the male main character meets this guy Martin Darius, who may be the serial killer, at like 8 o'clock at night. It's in a high-rise office building with the only person in it is the cleaning crew, and I have represented serial killers. I was a lawyer for 25 years, criminal lawyer, and I was in 30 homicide cases where I represented people who kill people, and I realized that when I was sitting with a serial killer who killed women, since I knew I wasn't his type, I wasn't that nervous. But I thought, well, what if I had a female main character in this situation? I said the tension would be through the roof, because this guy's, this is what he does. He tortures women. So I knew I had to do a sex change on my main character, and so I was really nervous, and I decided that, I was going to have this woman character. And then since then, I got over my fear of women, and about half my books have these strong women characters. So with Robin, a lot of the times the women get into dangerous situations. And in real life, if a man and a woman have a fight, the guy's probably going to win because bigger upper body strength, etc. So I thought, well, I'm going to make Robin a UFC. She works her way through Yale Law School, pays her tuition by fighting on in pay-per-view events in Las Vegas and cage fights. So I figured, well, okay, that if she gets in a fight, which she does occasionally in the books with a male, it'll make sense if she wins because she's a trained fighter. Mm-hmm. So that was sort of the motivation. And then the reason she becomes a lawyer is because all of her brothers in the small Midwestern town were wrestlers, and she wanted to be on the boys wrestling team, and the school board said she couldn't. So her dad hired a lawyer, and they sued so she could get on the team, and she won, and that's inspired her to be a lawyer. So.
And what about you? Where did Rachel come from?
Yeah, so the notion for Rachel Marin, who's the main character in Hideaway, came pretty soon after my wife and I had our first daughter. She's a daughter's about 2.5 now, and I was thinking about starting a new series, but hadn't quite hit on the main character yet. And sort of the idea came to me. There was one night when our daughter was about 6 months old. And like most parents, we had a little monitor next to our bed. You see them stare at your child all night to make sure they're breathing. But at 6 months, the risk of SIDS is very, very low. But I remember at night, my wife would stare at the monitor every night, all night for 10 hours. She'd wake up the next morning exhausted. So our daughter was 6 months old. As the stupid husband, I said, why don't you not stare at the monitor all night? You can get some sleep. And she said something that stuck with me, which was, you'll never know what it's like to grow something inside of you and then have it exist outside of you and not know if it's living or healthy. And that just struck me, as I consider myself a good, very hands-on, loving father, but there was an intimacy and a bond, I think, at that moment that I realized between a mother and a child that I would never fully understand. And I love the idea of starting a series with this character who was very capable and skilled and strong, but at the same time as vulnerable as anybody because she had 2 children. To me, it felt like a lot of times in sort of mysteries or thrillers, the main characters tend to take, not in all cases, but tend to be kind of loners. They're the kind of people that they can go out and get into bar fight, they can stay out till God knows whatever hour, drinking and stuff. But what if you had a character like that and she had 2 small children at home? What if she was a single mother? So when we meet Rachel, something absolutely terrible happens to her family in the very first chapter, and she essentially has to reinvent her entire life in order to protect herself and her children. So she's essentially honed both her mind and her body to protect her children because the system and society have let them down. And I thought that was a really interesting dynamic to take a character who could be a very strong and skilled and capable investigator and crime fighter, but has to make sure her children get to school on time, has to cook dinner, has to make sure homework is done. And I thought that'd be a really interesting conflict right off the bat. How does a person like that how do you balance both aspects of being essentially a crime fighter and a dedicated parent to 2 small children?
Right. And before I ask more questions about the books, I don't want to be the guy who botches the explanation. So why don't you each do you want to just give a brief explanation of your book, and then Phil can do the same?
Yeah. So in Hideaway, it's about a woman named Rachel Marin, and something absolutely terrible has happened to her family that you'll have to read the book to find out what happened.
But only the
I'm not
first
going to give
chapter.
it away. I mean, God, I'm trying to make a living here. But something terrible happened to her family, and because of that, she was forced to move away with her 2 small children to a town called Ashby in Illinois. It's a small town, the kind of place where you can get lost. She's had to reinvent her life, change her name, change her children's names in order to protect them. And she's also essentially had to hone her mind and her body to protect her family because she's learned firsthand that nobody's going to protect her. But when the former mayor of the town, who showed Rachel a kindness when she moved there, is found dead, Rachel knows that it was murder, not suicide. And she doesn't believe that the system is going to essentially give this woman justice. So she takes it upon herself to try to find the killer. And in doing so, comes into conflict with the actual detectives who are investigating the case, but it also threatens to unearth the terrible secret in her past that she's been trying to conceal. So she has to investigate this murder, try to keep her secrets buried, and protect her children all at the same time.
Wow.
Robin? Lockwood
That's
number
all?
3.
Yeah. And she has to make a casserole for dinner.
So in 1970, ABC, I think it was ABC, used to have a late night show where they would have all sorts of unusual stuff, and like they had the first full contact karate tournament on, and one night I was watching it and they had magic, and I'd never seen big magic before, and I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. The one I remember specifically was there was a woman sitting on a bridge chair like this chair in the middle of a bare stage, and the magician put a sheet over her, and the next thing you know, he pulls it off, she's gone, and she's in a cabinet on the other side. So I just became, this is where we say, please turn off your cell phones. So I became, unless it's my agent with a movie deal. So then I'll take it over here while they go on. So I just became hooked on magic, and I've seen almost all of it, like David Copperfield in person, and I love magic. And so I thought it'd be really cool to have a magician as the main character in a book. And Robert Chesterfield, who calls himself Lord Chesterfield, he's a phony, he's not really a lord, is this really horrible person who's a magician. And you find out in the prologue, which is the very first couple of pages, that he is murdered on stage in front of 3,000 people while performing the Chamber of Death illusion, where he's locked in a coffin with padlocks, and poisonous snakes and scorpions are put in the coffin, and it's supposed to work that when they open it up he's gone and he reappears in the back of the theater, but this time he's murdered on stage and you don't know who the killer is. So I had two challenges. The first was I don't want to find out how these how they do the stuff, because it usually is really boring, but I had to figure out how the Chamber of Death would work. So a friend of mine who's a judge and an amateur magician, and he has a friend who's a lawyer and an amateur magician. And so they worked out, I had lunch with them, and they worked out the Chamber of Death and showed, and you find out in the book, I won't tell you now how it works, but when you learn how it works, you go, oh, that's how it goes. So it's much better not to know. And then, but I had to figure out, how do you kill someone in front of 3,000 people and you don't know who done it, and that was really a lot of fun to do. And I won't tell you who the killer is. You have to figure out yourself. So that's.
So yeah, when I started my creative career in my early 20s as a stand-up comedian, and so I know a lot of magicians, and I've been in the Magic Castle and the Secret Library, and so I know how a lot of the tricks work, and I know that there's a lot in common between writing a murder mystery and creating an illusion. Mm-hmm. Is that, my question for you is, as a criminal defense attorney, do you use the same kind of tricks that
You mean when I was actually practicing criminal law?
Yeah.
No, everyone, don't watch television.
That's why I'm asking.
All this stuff on TV is so stupid.
My books are actually just filled with dry ice.
No, really, the way you win cases is before trial. Mm-hmm. You have to do a lot of interview the witnesses and find out what the facts stuff are. And it's really the thing when I occasionally talk at law schools, and I always tell them, it's not an adversary profession like it is on TV. It's a teaching profession. It really doesn't matter who the other guy is. You're just trying to convince the person who's deciding the facts, either a jury or a judge, that your ideas are intellectually superior to the other guys. And so the real trials are boring. I mean, usually if they're not for the lawyer, because you have all these evidence issues, but if I did a book like a real trial, I wouldn't fall asleep. So no, you just you don't do it. They also have discovery.
Yeah, so everything's open.
Yeah, so in Oregon, if you have to tell the other side who your witnesses are and give them all the statements that they made and stuff. So it's not like the TV shows. So I got one guy to confess on the stand, my first trial that I ever had.
Really? And then everything after that was a disappointment?
I thought, wow, this is just like your old Stanley Gardner. But it never happened again. I actually had to I used to say that I know a trial was going great if I fell asleep in the middle. If I was awake, something had happened that I hadn't prepared
Right.
for, and that was bad. So
Okay, good. We're educated. Jason, so when you have two really young kids, and when my kids were that young, I wrote and produced TV, and I couldn't set my own hours because the TV show had to come on every week. So, but you are a publisher and an author with two. When do you write?
So I was just saying this before, but so I just turned in the final draft of the next book in this series, which will be out next year, and it was the hardest book I've ever had to write, just by the virtue of I had no time to write it. Our second daughter was born, was a newborn when I was writing this book. So I had one kid who was like, our daughters are 16 and a half months apart. So I had one child who was a just become a toddler and a newborn at home, and I was also running a company. So it was the only book I've ever written in like 15 to 30 minute bursts, where it was like, okay, this kid's napping, that kid's gonna nap. I had like 15 minutes to write, and it was literally like that. It was like, okay, write 3 paragraphs, go. You know, a lot of authors say like, oh, I try to 2,000 words of eloquent prose. I'm like, I have 15 minutes before somebody screams for their milk or animal crackers. And then, so the book was written like that, 15 to 30 minute bursts, and I got 100,000 words out of that. And then I worked my butt off editing it, and it was really like that. It's sort of, the old adage, like, if you want something done, give it to a busy person. That's absolutely true. But I had to turn down so many things this year just because I didn't have time to turn down, like, speaking engagements and conferences and teaching gigs, because I was like, this all sounds wonderful, but I just don't have time to do it. Because in the end, the company is my priority, these books are my priority, my kids are my priority. As much as I know there's a great anthology I wanted to be in that I had to turn down because I didn't have time to write a short story. But it was really that. It was like, for this book, when our first daughter was born, it was a little bit easier only because like when she napped, I could get like, okay, she's going to nap for 2.5 hours. I can sit down and write for, a good stretch. With these kids, like, they're never napping at the same time. Our youngest daughter was colicky, so the first 3 months were really rough. She still doesn't sleep past like 5:15 in the morning. And I'm on East Coast time right now, so like, you're talking like I might need someone to like throw water at me at some point. But it was like that. But at the same time, like when I finished this book, there was like a sense of accomplishment. Not saying that finishing the book I don't get a sense of accomplishment with each book, but like this one, I was like, I wrote this book under hard as hell circumstances, and if I can do this now, it's probably only going to get a little bit easier. So that was really it. Just like I had 5 minutes. I can write 10 words. I wrote a book with that.
So when my kids were young, I just gave them sleeping pills. They come to a couple hours later and get a lot of work done, and it's fine. This is some parental advice.
Sleeping pills, check. Good thing this is being recorded.
So, and then your full-time job is, in addition to being a writer, is you have a publishing company. So, when you come up with ideas for books, like we all do, and we're like, no, that stinks, or that's good, or that's, how much are you wearing your writer's hat when you decide what to write, and how much are you wearing your publisher's hat?
I don't think you can ever. So I run a company called Polis Books, which is an independent publishing company, which is different from the publisher that publishes my books that are here tonight.
He rejected himself.
I did.
He had to write himself a rejection letter.
Honestly, I'm not very talented.
Keep trying.
One of these days somebody will take it. But I get asked that a lot. Is why don't I publish my own books through my own company? I said because we're not a vanity press. I would never use my company's resources to publish myself. So I don't think you ever take both off, because even when I've been an editor for so long that even when I'm reading a book, as much as I'm enjoying it, I look at it with a bit of a critical eye, and I wish I didn't do that, because I want to be able to just like turn that off and just say like, okay, this is a full-on story. But when I'm writing my own book, like there is a sense of enjoyment. There's also a sense of, okay, I know I'm gonna have to fix this. I know I'm gonna have to go back. So I say I always have both the editorial and the writer hat on at a given time, and I do think it actually helps me, because I think I can be very critical of myself, and I do think that helps make the books better.
Right. And Phillip, one thing I lived and worked in Los Angeles for a long time, and I'm from Minneapolis and lived there again, and I've noticed I set my books in Minneapolis so far I have, because I just like what motivates people to commit crimes there, which is mostly shame. They just want to fit in. Like if you think of the movie Fargo, there was a guy who just wanted to keep up, and his car dealership wasn't doing well, and so he went to extreme measures to try to rectify that. In Los Angeles, people are chasing fame and money, and in New York, people are chasing power, I think. Is there an underlying thing in Portland, Oregon, do you think? Does the city have a characteristic that leads lends itself to crime fiction?
I mean, if there is, I don't know it.
Right.
I mean,
Somebody opened a raw bar right next to somebody else's raw bar.
The only real good thing, for those of you who don't know a lot about Portland, it's got the best summers in the universe. But to get the beautiful greens and flowers, it's got to rain about 4 or 5 months a year steady. So when I say it was a dark and stormy night, I'm not lying. No, I don't. I mean, I have a lot of stuff about Portland, places and stuff like that. But I'm a plot guy.
Mm-hmm.
The thing my editors used to beat me up about is I don't care who the characters are. And I didn't care what the scenery was. So now I do good character development after being yelled at for many years. But I'm mostly just interested in the plots and making them as complicated and having surprise endings and twists. So I don't really.
Do you outline?
Oh yeah, but that's the big debate. People, some say you shouldn't outline. So I can't understand how you wouldn't outline. But I think a lot of it's very anal, and it comes from being a lawyer who did like 2-month drug trials or 2-month murder trials. You gotta get everything in place. So the way I work is first I get an idea, and it's like, could the President of the United States be a serial killer, which is actually one of my books, and then I think about. I don't write. I think. And I'll think with that one, it took me 10 years to get from the idea to an actual, usually I don't take that long, otherwise I wouldn't have 23 books. But so I'll think about the characters, and I'll think about the twists and turns, and then I won't write a word till I get the ending, because that's the most important part of a book. How many of you guys have read a book or seen a movie that was great and had a stupid ending? So what do you tell your friends? I saw a movie or I read that book. It wasn't very good. And you forget you loved 90% of it. And then the flip side is if you have a mediocre book or movie with a great ending, oh my God, when I found out the butler did it, I couldn't believe it. You forget most of the book wasn't very good. So I won't write till I get the ending. And then once I get the ending, which I can change, I've done that occasionally, then I will spend months on an outline. And I literally talk myself through the book from beginning to end. So the outlines are about 25 pages. I have one that was 60. And so by the time I finish the outline, and then the thing is you're spending 4 or 5 hours a day just thinking and not writing. And so you're constantly getting new ideas. So then you add to the outline, you realize this character shouldn't be doing this. So by thinking and not writing, you get yourself all the way through. And then once the outline's done, I just take each paragraph and turn it into a chapter. And then I end up with like a 400-page outline, because the first drafts are always crap. They're not very good. And then I spend months and months on editing for quality. So now you know everything I know about writing. I only had one writing class. I got a C+ in it, so this is all I know.
I think that away from the writing time is really important, and that must be a challenge for you with young kids in the company. Do you find most of it happens at the keyboard for you, or do you just have like a sub-level of thought going all the time?
Sub-level. I take a manuscript and I put it in like a wine cellar for 6 months, and I go back to it. So to sort of piggyback off what you were saying, I think like it's always like pantser versus plotter, and you're a plotter.
Right.
Pantser is like, you write by the seat of your pants. I'm more of a pantser. When I start a book, I generally I know the opening scene, I know a scene around the midpoint of the book when there's a big plot twist or a big action scene or something big is going to happen, and I tend to know the ending. Other than that, I know nothing. So to me, that's how I work. It helps my creativity. I think the characters sort of then show me the way. But what does happen then is that throughout the book, when I'm not writing, my thought process is constantly working. So I'll constantly, I'll literally be in the shower and I'll be like, oh, this needs to happen. I'll get out of the shower and text myself this thing so I don't forget it. So by the end of the book, I have a 25-page single-spaced sort of notes that just came to me throughout the writing of the book. But other than that, I generally have a few demarcation points where I know big things are going to happen, and then I don't have an outline for that. So I generally, when it comes to editing, I finish the first draft. So a lot of people edit as they go. I like to have the entire book done before I start editing. That way, if I need to go back, if I'm editing in chapter 2, I know how the rest of the story is going to play out. So I know, okay, if I tweak this here, these are the reverberations that are going to happen in chapter 37. It used to be where I could finish a book, and I do think it helps to get some distance away from it. You put literally, you don't look at it for 2 weeks, then you go back to it with a fresh set of eyes and say, okay, I missed this. I don't have much of that option right now, partly because of the kids, but also because I'm on deadline. So the deadline for the second book was, I think, literally mid-February. So I don't have the benefit of being able to put something away for a few months and let it ferment nicely, because I do have to have the book in. But I think at this point, I've edited enough books, and this is my 7th book for adults. Hopefully I've done enough now at this point where I trust myself pretty well.
Great. How are we doing on time? Do we want to do
We're
questions?
doing fine, but I have a question
Yes.
for Jason. What's the difference between what you're doing and the outline that Phil is writing, except that yours is happening kind of as you go, and Phil's is happening slightly beforehand? But
There's not much of one. It's that I
really
think
isn't,
the difference
is
is
there?
that he starts with the outline and mine sort of comes together as I go with it. But in the end, I do have I don't know if you call what I have an outline, because if you read it right now, it would make absolutely no sense whatsoever. It's not in order. I'll have notes for chapter 23 on page 2 and notes for chapter 3 on page 12 of the outline. It's literally just notes and things that come to me. So it makes no discernible sense if you don't know what I'm talking about. It's not in any chronological order whatsoever. But it's really just, it exists only so that I have somewhere to catalog everything, because once I write it down, I don't forget it. Because if a thought comes to me and I don't write it down, I'm gonna forget it. So it's a chance for me to sort of cement this idea so that I know, okay, yesterday I was writing chapter 9, I had a thought, this is what I want to happen the rest of the chapter. So it's not any sort of formal outline, and you probably look at it and go, this guy is not a professional by any means whatsoever, but it works for me.
Well, that's one of the things I always tell. I talk to classes and stuff about. So I remember one time they had one of the high schools had job shadowing, and which I thought was ridiculous for a writer, because I spent all day playing Free Cell on my computer, and I don't know how. So, but there were 4 kids from the high school came to my office, my law office, and I was talking to them, and I was going into, I really think outline is important. I use an outline, and you should outline. And I noticed one of the girls, she was just getting totally frazzled, and finally she just burst out and said, "I can't use an outline." I said, "Don't use an outline." I said, actually, one of the neat things about writing is it's not like math. Anything that gets you from page 1 to the end is a phenomenal system. So there isn't any real rules. This is just stuff that works for me. If you don't do what I do, but you get to the end of the book, then it's fantastic.
There's a great quote. I want to say it's Elmore Leonard, but I might be wrong. Actually, Barbara probably knows this, but it's that you can drive from New York to Los Angeles with nothing but your headlights on. You may only be able to see 6 feet in front of you, but you can drive the entire way like that.
Yeah, I've heard that. I worked in television. I wrote a lot of TV. I've worked on almost 500 episodes, and I didn't write all of those, but I was one of the writers involved. And we always had an outline because we had to. Because there's 200 people involved in a production. You need studios to sign off and networks, and everybody has to be on the same page. The people building the sets need to know what to build. So you have to have these outlines. And invariably, when the script was written off of the outline, it didn't work. But that's what you said about your first draft. You'll get your first draft, and then you have to go.
So an outline is a stick figure. It's like two-dimensional. Once you actually start writing the book, then stuff changes. So the big thing, like the example I always give is, let's say in my outline, I have my hero, he's in an alley and 6 guys attack him and he beats them up with karate. Well, that's a great scene, but what if my hero turns out to be a 130-pound accountant and these guys are really big guys that are like really vicious, so that won't work, and you don't realize it until you start writing the scene and say, wait a minute, I mean, even if he doesn't know karate, this isn't going to work. So then you'd have them give tax tips to them. They say,
do not try this if you get mugged. Do not try to get the tax tips will not get you out of trouble.
I'll do your taxes.
Bore them to death.
Yeah. No, but so it's not unusual for something in the outline that sounds phenomenal to when I actually start doing it, it doesn't work, and so you have to go and either add a character or do other stuff to make it work. But
You've written 23 books?
24 is in New York now.
24.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask on behalf of Jason and myself, does it get easier?
Well, you know, I tell you, and the secret is to be very old. So that's a secret. No, it's for me. It's just like fun to do.
Right.
I can't wait to get to the office every morning. I kept my office when I started writing full time in '96, and I just can't wait. I hate sleeping because then I'm not working, and then I get down and I just get so excited. I'm a puzzle guy. Like I do the New York Times every morning, and I was a competitive chess player. So for me, the books are puzzles. So I've got all these characters, and I got this plot stuff, and can I get them all to work? The thing is, I think it's called a Chinese box puzzle, but it's a square, and there are sticks, and if you push one stick in, it goes out the other side. So there's a way where you can push all the sticks, and you solve it by getting all the sticks so that it's smooth on all the sides. And that's the way I look at the book. I've got all these ideas. Can I get them? Can I get them to actually work? And it's fun. I don't do stress. I mean, I cannot wait to get in. And so if I'm not writing, I feel antsy.
So I was actually a competitive chess player too.
Oh, okay.
So I think we need to do like the first ever poison pen chess.
That's terrific. But let me ask you a question. Do you agree that structure is necessary for a crime novel?
Do I agree? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I do think for any novel, you need to have essentially a central conflict. I think depending on the kind of book that you're writing, if you're writing more of a mystery or more of a thriller, I would say with Hideaway, it's the first book I've written that probably had more mystery elements than the other books that I've written. In terms of, there is a murder, you don't know who committed it, and I essentially, if anybody saw Knives Out, I needed there to be essentially, there needed to be 6 or 7 people that had legitimate either motive, reason, or ability to commit the crime, and I didn't want any of them to essentially feel like you were weighted towards them. So I really did want the reader to feel like they didn't know who the killer was, and then for it to be a bit of a surprise at the end. The other books I've written tend to be more thrillers, where they tend to be very more plot-driven, but this was the first one where I really had to be very careful in my plotting to make sure that if there were red herrings, that they weren't too obvious, or that they were obvious enough that you actually would pick up on that. So for me, the structure of this book was very different than anything else I'd written in that term.
So for me, I mean, mine are a combination. The inspiration for my law career was Earl Stanley Gardner's Perry Mason, because all I wanted to do since I was a little kid was murder cases. And then Ellery Queen, who is just being reprinted. And in Ellery Queen, there are clues, and if you can figure out the clues, you can figure out the killer. He actually has a page that's a challenge to the reader about 90% through, and says you now have all the clues to figure out who killed Mr. Jones. Can you do it? So mine are a mix. So I have a lot of action in the books, but I also have clues and surprise ending. They all have a surprise ending, and they're all a lot of people who could be the bad guy. And I try to put some clues in there that'll let you figure out, who does it, who did it, if you can get it.
So if you're talking about outlining, are you really talking about the structure? I mean, is that the primary focus of the outline? Is the structure of the book and then you fill it in?
I think you tend to outline more than I do. I generally tend to have like the bottom floor, the middle floor, and the top floor.
Okay.
That's really the extent of the outline. When I have probably by the end of the book a 25-page single-spaced essentially notebook, but it's not in any way a outline that would make sense to anybody, and it is not the story. So I think like my outline tends to be very short and far less detailed than what you do. I tend to be more of a pantser.
And mine's the whole book.
Oh, I got it.
Yeah.
But would the structure change depending on what kind of crime novel you were writing? Because there are so many variations. So you would write one structure for Knives Out,
Yeah.
but if you were doing
Yeah.
Silence of the Lambs, you'd have it entirely different.
So my first book was called The Mark, and I sort of wanted to be like a 21st century version of The Fugitive. So the whole thing takes place over 2-3 days, and it's essentially a 350-page chase novel. So the structure of that was very, very different because essentially I just wanted it to be nonstop, high octane. It's two characters on the run from the cops and an assassin. It's much more of a thriller because this one it's there is action, there is suspense, but there's also a bit of a slow burn because there's nobody chasing. It's not that kind of book. So the structure was very, very different. There didn't need to be as many red herrings because we knew what the conflict was right off the bat, and who the killer was at the end wasn't, of course, sort of as important as how you were going to get there. I'm going to sound like the biggest dork in the world, but I said, a lot of people ask what the difference is between a mystery and a thriller. And watching my oldest daughter one day, I knew the difference between a mystery and a thriller. And a mystery is, what is my daughter putting into her mouth? And the thriller is, can I get to her before she swallows it?
That's very good.
So Matt, you haven't talked about your book. You're writing private eye novels. And they're different than a legal thriller or
Yeah.
a police procedural, Jason's book. So how would you describe Neil Shapiro and his work?
Definitely more mysteries than thrillers, I would say. Nils is a private investigator in Minneapolis, and the first 3 books are set in Minneapolis. And in the 4th book, he goes to Los Angeles. That's coming out in June. A wealthy couple who lives on Summit Avenue in St. Paul. Their grandson inherits his trust fund and moves to LA, and they're scared to death. He's throwing it away on show business, investing in film and TV. So they send Nils out there to keep an eye on it. And that was really my chance to show. I lived in Los Angeles on and off for 30 years. From my early 20s, and I really wanted to show that city the way I never got used to living there, so I wanted to show the city and show business through Nils' eyes. I have a comedy background. For those of you who don't know, I wrote on Seinfeld and a lot of other shows, and the big question I get is how I went from writing TV comedy to murder mysteries. And the answer is, if you're as introverted as I am and spend 25 years in rooms full of writers pitching jokes at you all day, you think about killing some people. So that's how I made that transfer, and I'm very happy. I'm quite happy writing books. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
my question was, how do you see a private eye
Oh.
investigation? How do you see the structure of it?
Oh, the structure of it?
'Cause you
Well,
have one of the great opening scenes ever in your first Neil Shapiro book. It's really brilliant.
oh, thank you. Do I have to explain that now? Here's how I see private eye books, at least the ones that I have motivated me and that I still enjoy to read, and that is that there's a murder case. I'll tell you about the one in the first book in a minute, but the private detective is really trying to solve themselves. Him or herself is really the mystery. So, in my first book, Gone to Dust, it starts with an unusual crime scene. A woman is found murdered, and her body and most of the house is covered in the dust and dirt from hundreds of vacuum cleaner bags. So, there's so much forensic evidence in that dust and dirt, hair and fiber and DNA, that the crime scene unit can't really they can't do anything. They don't know where to start. So this suburban police department brings in a consultant, and that's where Neil Shapiro comes in. But since that crime can't be solved in the lab, he has to use his experience and what's going on in his personal life to gain insight into the investigation. And so the reason I did that is so we would have an organic reason to meet Nils and get into his personal life. And the books are very much about his personal life as well as the crime that's going on. And that's very true for Phillip Marlowe, for me. I thought Chandler did that really well. And because you care about who did it, but you really care about that Phillip Marlowe solves the crime because you care about that guy and that point of view. And so that's what I think of the structure of a private detective book is. Because when it's just a dead body and a tough talking, wisecracking person who drinks too much and gets in fights, I tend to lose interest. So
You want to ask for questions from the audience?
yes. Yes.
This is for all three of you. So,
Okay.
so you mentioned Oregon, you mentioned Minneapolis and LA, and a small town in Illinois. So for those that are using real places, how much did you make it real, and how much did you make up what you wanted to make up?
So I get this all the time because people will either they love the references to Portland or they'll say, well, this doesn't, this place doesn't exist. And since it's my book, I don't do any damn thing I want. So I'm very lazy. The only reason I said I'm in Portland is I'd actually have to do research. I mean, I had one scene, The Associate, where the hero and heroine were going to meet for coffee. And I look out my window and there's a big Starbucks. Put them Starbucks. So, but then in After Dark, I had a whole section that was in a county on the coast. And cliffs and rain and stuff, and I didn't want to have to go out to Lincoln County and figure out where every damn rock was and what every street was. So I just made up a county. So it's just whatever I want to do. If I want to keep, if I want to have the real thing and it's easy, I'll do that. But if I can use phony stuff if I want to. But that's the nice thing about being a writer and not being a lawyer. With a lawyer, I got a footnote every damn thing. That's saying I just do what I want to do.
So this Hideaway takes place in a fictional city called Ashby, and I want a fictional city on purpose because I want as original children move to the kind of town where it's a small enough city that people tend to kind of mind their own business, big enough that she could get a job, close enough to transportation in case there's an emergency she and her children needed to leave. But I also wanted to essentially also invent the city's backstory. Because she moves there thinking it's sort of just any old Midwestern town, but as you read this book and more into the series, you learn a lot more about the city itself. And if I had set if I'd set it in Portland, or if I'd set it in Chicago, or if I'd set it in LA, these cities have, history, decades, hundreds of years old. You can't really just totally make that up. So I wanted to be able to essentially create a city, create a history for it, and start fresh, essentially. And that was a lot of fun because I do want, almost like Batman Gotham City. Gotham City is a character for Batman. I wanted the city of Ashby to have a bit of a personality too, and it was a lot of fun to essentially create this world around Rachel. Actually, once I was writing the book and I started to kind of set scenes in different places, I have you might notice this when you go to book sign tonight. I have the world's worst handwriting. My handwriting has not changed since the third grade. But I had to create an actual map to remember where everything was. So I had this awful sketch of a map of Ashby, Illinois at home with here's the Albertson Bridge, and here's where the town hall is, and here's all this. And it looks like, a second grader drew it, but it was really good for me to sort of remember where everything was. And it was also a lot, I felt like I was writing Lord of the Rings.
I use real cities, and I use a lot of real streets and places and businesses. There's people who have come to my book signings in Minneapolis with maps that they follow my characters around in. And I use restaurants, and everything's real. I don't use anyone's real home because that feels invasive to me. But the reason I use real, I do it in the Minneapolis stories and in the Los Angeles story. I use real streets and real places because for the reader, if they know that place, they just get more invested. But more importantly, if they don't know that place, it just doesn't sound made up. And so it lends credibility to all the stuff I do make up.
So I read Gone to Dust, which is really good, and my wife's from Minneapolis, so as I was reading, I said, "Oh, look, we went here." I didn't do it. I kept on telling her, "Oh, look at this! This one, I know that restaurant." So
Yeah, so I do it. It grounds me as a writer too, just to be able to go into a real place and write about it.
And there's one thing about this. I had in one of my books, I have the two of the characters meet for lunch at Brasserie Montmartre, where I used to eat maybe once a week. And so, but I said hi to the owner once, but you know, every once in a while I go and I just say hi, but we never had a real talk or anything. And so one day I came in, and after the book was out, and he said, he had the book, and he said, "Did you write this?" I said, "Yeah." He says, well, "You had your characters eat lunch?" I said, "Yeah, because I eat here all the time." He says, "Well, lunch is on me." So I said, "Oh, great." I said, "Thank you." You know. So the next time I came in, he says, "Lunch is on me." I said, "Okay, this is the last one." But that is a good reason to put real places that
You convinced me. I'm now moving the next book in the series to a real town just so I can get free meals.
You get free food.
Yeah.
That's really good. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Or? Yeah.
I was curious, you had said that you were really scared about writing a woman.
Yeah.
So I was wondering how you got over that, or how did you...
Okay, so it's a funny story. So my first wife passed away in 2007, and my second wife is sitting in the back there. And I've been really super lucky to have two great marriages. But when I was figured out that I had to switch over from a male to a female, so then I thought, well, how the hell am I going to do this? And I thought, well, who's the toughest guy I know? And it was my wife, who was also a lawyer. So then I said, okay, in every scene where Betsy Tannenbaum appears, I'll just imagine my wife, Doreen, in the scene, and how she would talk and what she would do. And that got me over my fear of females. And then after I wrote the book, I said, oh, this isn't that difficult. So, you know, but it was pretty traumatic initially. I was really pretty scared when I started.
Well, I have a question for you. Don't take this the wrong way, but,
Has any question ever ended well after that?
but as an editor, when you give your book to your editor, and she like makes a mistake or like finds mistakes and things like that, does it make you question yourself?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. No, absolutely.
I don't want to say you're a bad editor.
No, not at all. I mean, it's a totally different part of your brain where you edit somebody else's work versus your own, and like so. Hideaway, before Hideaway, my agent ever shopped Hideaway, I want to say we did 6 or 7 full drafts of it. That's like top to bottom, first word of the book to the last word of the book, like pretty thorough edits. My agent had some feedback for me on that too. And then once we sold the book and it went to my actual editor, you know, I think we did another 2 to 3 drafts, and every single draft she caught things that I had missed or things that could make the story better. Just things like not changing the book, but just sort of like forcing me to look at things a little deeper or make the characters' motivations like things that drew things out of the book that I hadn't seen. So it's like it's daunting for like you get that first edit, and you know Phil's done this 23, 24 times now. Like to get that edited manuscript back, and now like nobody uses red pencils anymore. It's all in track changes. But you know the first thing I do is I scroll through the track changes and be like, oh my god, that's a lot of notes. That's a lot of notes. Holy crap. But then, you know, so it's very daunting to person who's like, oh my, like, why did they want to publish this book to begin with? But then you sort of see, like, no, these are just things that are going to help make the book better. So you have to turn off, you have to realize, like, they want to publish my book. They like the book. They like me to some extent. They just think it can be a little better, and they're helping me get there. And if you understand from that perspective, you'll be okay.
So about editing, people don't understand the editing thing. When I get an editor, a new one that hasn't worked with me before, the first thing I tell them is, do not tell me anything you like about the book. Because if you like it, it's working. Tell me what you don't like and why you don't like it, and then do you have a constructive, you know, some idea to make it better. So the way I always explain editing is, let's say you and I are playing a game of chess, and I have been practicing for this game for 10 years, and beating you in this game is the most important thing in my entire life. And we finally get to the game, and I take an hour on my move in a very complex situation. I move my bishop out. Now, you are sitting on the opposite side of the board. You don't know what I was thinking about. You have a different perspective. And you say, oh, I've got a checkmate in 3. So it isn't that I didn't try. I tried my hardest. This is the most important thing in my life. I missed stuff. And the editor's job, because you wouldn't put it in your book if you didn't think it was well done. It was good. You think about it, you edit it yourself, you do it. But the editor's job is to pick up things where you screwed up. And basically, I would say 90% of the editorial suggestions I accept. And then if we have a disagreement on something, it's not adversarial. I'm trying to write a book that you're going to enjoy reading, and I don't care who helps me with it. So I want to get help so the book's good. And so if we have a disagreement, we'll just have a very civilized discussion about why I think this should be the way it is, and he'll say why he doesn't, and we just talk it out. But your editor's job is to figure out where you have where he thinks you messed or she thinks you messed up, and then point that out, and then discuss that. Yeah.
It's been my my experience that there are two kinds of editors. I was exec story editor at a major studio, and I saw my job as trying to help the writer realize his or her vision. That was my job.
You're the one of the good ones.
Then I went out as an independent writer-producer, and I was on the other side of the table, and I found that most of the studio executives, the producers, the directors, the stars, weren't interested in helping me realize my vision. They were interested in making it their own.
Yes.
They wanted to put their personal stamp on it. And, I get the notes, and at first I'd be homicidal, and then I'd be suicidal. But I'm just curious, do you encounter writers in publishing, editors in publishing who are like those guys I saw?
Because I've worked in both mediums.
Yeah.
It is way more of a respectful process in publishing. Way more. Everything from beginning to end is a more respectful, intelligent process. There are some wonderful, we call them, they're called story editors in the movie business, right? In TV, they're just the network and studio executives. There are some wonderful ones, and that's exactly what they do. They help you realize your vision. But then there are a ton that just want to make it.
I would say, like, if you want to be famous and be known for things and get your name out there, you don't become a book editor. It is not the industry where it's like, I have delusions of grandeur. I want to see my name on billboards everywhere. I'm going to work as a book editor. Nobody ever says that.
Yeah.
No, book editors, like, I think the maxim for any book editor is that they don't want to leave their fingerprints on a manuscript. They want to more like you said, help the author realize their vision. And as an editor myself, there are times when authors and I will disagree on something, and then I always defer to the author because it's their book. I want the book that comes out, I want it to be the one that they want to be published, not the one that I wanted them to publish.
And also, it's a different medium, because the book is the end product with a book. The movie is the end product, which is not the script. The script is sort of gets you going, and then there's a whole other process that takes place. So your script isn't what gets published. It's a movie that goes out.
That's why every writer wants to direct.
Or write novels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what, this will be a great moment to say goodbye to our video audience, and thank you so much for joining us.